Yes, my name is Mirta Teichberg. I am working at the Ecosystem Center in the Marine Biological Laboratory. And the first few slides I'm actually going to kind of quickly go through because, of course, Agnes already did some introductions, but I think it doesn't hurt to just start out with why this matters, why it's important to us. So Agnes already mentioned how important they are for habitat, sediment stabilization, oxygen production in the water column, filtering out nutrients, storing carbon, and buffering the ocean acidification. And I think I just wanted to also point out that, like on Cape Cod, this has really been well studied for many years. We know a lot about these things, but this is also globally right now a really important topic. And just like Seagrass Net is a global network, there is a lot of people around the world who are really working on trying to show and communicate the value of seagrasses to the environment and to people. So I think that's great that we're all doing this. And we're also working on restoration on this. So eelgrass, Zostra marina, is what we have here on Cape Cod, but I just want to point out that it's actually really widely distributed on both sides of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It's a temperate species. And so this is something important also to note. There's only about 70 species of seagrasses worldwide, and this is one of the most dominant and widely distributed. So we know a lot about Zostra because of that. The decline of Zostra or eelgrass in Massachusetts has been prevalent. So when Mass DEP maps have shown that starting in 1995 all the way to present, we have lost 50%. This shows you a little bit other images that similar to the ones that Agnes showed you. And you can really go to this website to get a very good history of these regions. And I'm going to actually go to one of the estuaries on Buzzards Bay, West Falmouth Harbor, which is like in this area here. So you can see a little bit more what's been happening in this region. So there has been seagrass lost in West Falmouth Harbor for many years. And if you go back even pre the 1995 data, you can go to 1985, you can see that there's seagrasses, eelgrass outside of the harbor, into the harbor, all the way here into the inner harbor as well, and the southern basin. In 2001, you can see that there's still quite a bit of eelgrass in the outer harbor, a little bit in the middle harbor, a little bit up in Snug Harbor, but we've already lost the southern basin part of the population. And if you jump to 2020, you can see that there's no longer eelgrass in Snug Harbor and in the southern basin. And so this is just a story that's been happening for many years in many different places. The interesting thing from my point of view, though, is to think a little bit about the history and the long-term data that's been collected. And so we know that nutrients is one of the main drivers of seagrass loss. This is not a direct effect, but an indirect effect. So when you have an increased nutrients, primarily nitrogen in the water column, you have an overgrowth of algae, both plankton as well as seaweeds, and that usually blocks light, which is important for seagrasses to grow. So I'm involved in a study that has been actually going on for many years. I just joined it, but it's been funded through Sea Grant, also through National Science Foundation with partners at Cornell University. Melanie Hain also, who's been here right now. I'll show some of her data to show how nutrients have changed over time and also the long-term ecosystem health of West Falmouth Harbor. And I also wanted to point out another project that I've just started in my lab working to try to use some tools in biotechnology that are used for horticulture and agriculture to kind of think, what can we do that's different than what we're currently doing to enhance seed-based propagation for restoration? And the important thing about West Falmouth Harbor is thinking a little bit about the history, the inputs of nutrients, and also the fact that the Falmouth wastewater treatment facility has been increasing the nutrient loads to this estuary. So that treatment those nutrients are going into this watershed. And in 2005, they added tertiary treatment, which we've been expecting since 2005 to then start seeing a reduction of that nitrogen. We have a lag time in that reduction, but some of the great data that Melanie has shown is that since 2011, all the way up to 2024, we're finally starting to see that reduction. And this is really critical because I think for seagrasses to come back, we do need to have a reduction of those nutrients. And this is something that a town did to reduce those loads, and it's finally slowly starting to show. But it takes time. And I think that's just something that the clocks that we're working on, we always want fast results, but I think we have to really show that it does take time and we still have chances if we work on the management. These sites here, these little dots, are areas where the same time that they were looking at nutrients, they were also looking at the seagrasses, the actual meadows themselves, and the health of the system. This shows the density of seagrasses per meter squared. It was a bit higher in the early 2000s. It dropped down, but it has been pretty steady in the outer harbor, as well as in that middle harbor, which is a little bit lower. But the good thing is it's steady. And I think that's the other thing to think about when we talk about restoration. This system is a system that still has natural seagrass meadows there. So we want to retain those. We want to conserve those and protect them, but we also think this could be a good option for recovery, the fact that there is still seagrass. But there's a lot of areas where it disappeared that is still impacted by water quality as well as sediment. And here you can just see some profiles directly in the sediment. In the two areas that lost seagrasses, Snug Harbor, which is where most of the nutrient load is going, has this rich organic layer over this fine-grained sediment. And so we don't yet know if the seagrasses will be able to survive if we were to transplant them in this area. If you go into the southern basin, you have a little bit of this sand cap above that same organic rich layer. So this is where we need to look at what are the sediment quality and conditions necessary for seagrass recovery and growth. So now I'm going to take you to the part of the project that's a little bit more exploratory and testing different methods. And this is to look at seagrass seed-based propagation for restoration. So as Agnes also mentions, these are marine flowering plants. It's pretty amazing to see. I'm going to see if this works. I'm going to take you down. You can see this is the reproductive shoot. And these are the flowers on the actual reproductive shoot. So if you can imagine a flower in your garden, this is a similar thing that's happening underwater. It's pretty impressive. So they do reproduce reproductively as well as vegetatively. And all these different sites on this map are places where we wanted to look a little bit more about what was happening. So we wanted to see the timing of when this is going on. So we looked across these sites and we observed that around in the early spring, there's a lot of vegetative growth, just the leaves. The flowering reproductive shoots start around April and May, and the seed production continues into May through July. And if we look at all of these sites in the Upper Cape and Outer Cape, you can see here, there's a little bit of variability. Some sites, which includes the Duck Harbor, has high reproductive output. So this is 20% of the shoots in total were reproductive. And you can see here, West Falmouth Harbor is fitting within this region here, so about 10%. So that's good. That means there's some natural recruitment that's possible where you have seeding directly from the seagrass meadow. If you look at the timing of when you could potentially collect seeds, if you want to do some active restoration, we could get mature seeds, highest density, pretty much in early July at most of the sites that we looked at within the Cape. It might vary if you go south of the Cape or north of the Cape. So we did collect reproductive shoots. We brought them back into our lab and left them in floating tanks until the seeds matured. When the seeds dropped, we then could sort them out and test them for viability. So these are the seagrass seeds. So now you have to kind of think of being a little bit like a farmer. Think about, okay, we have all of these amazing seeds. We don't know how viable they are. We do lose some directly just due to disease. So one idea is just to try to figure out how many of the seeds that we're collecting are actually viable. And then what we're trying to look at in the lab is to try to get optimal media and conditions for them to grow and to germinate and to allow those seedlings to get a little bit stronger. So if you imagine a seed on a plant, it's dispersed in the water. That seed has to find a spot. It has to have the perfect conditions, and it also has to be high quality. So if you just think of natural recruitment, or if you just disperse seeds by picking up the seeds and putting them into the environment, you have a pretty low percentage of their survival. Anywhere from, let's say, 3 to 10% is what we can kind of find in the literature and through other studies. So what we're trying to do is actually see if we can increase germination rates and success rates of the early life stage of these plants in the lab, and then propagate them to put back then out in the field. And so that's what we've been doing. So here you can see this year we collected about 5,000 seeds. We're actually experimenting to see 1,000 seeds or so in culture. So we're raising our little seedlings. And then once they are germinated, we're then changing them over to larger cultures. And then the idea is allowing them to grow and get a little bit stronger before we put them back in a nursery. We're also testing, well, what would be exactly the same populations if we just put them in sediment in a running seawater system? How well do they grow, and what is the difference between doing this special treatment? And I'm not going to give you those results because we have a poster out there. Abigail Skena is going to show you the germination rates and success rates of that experiment. But the next step is to then take those seedlings and put them in a nursery for this year to see what would happen if we keep them a little bit longer, allow their roots to form and to grow. And we still want to compare these different culturing methods to see if the time and effort is going to be worth it. So what we hope to do is then develop a plan for a pilot transplantation in this West Falmouth Harbor area. We're going to look also at where is the right conditions, where the sediment may be a good quality, as well as water quality. And so the idea would be to grow them out from nursery and then put them out in the field. So I'm hoping that maybe at a next conference, we can show results of that in the future. So just to summarize, locally and globally, nutrient pollution is really one of the main causes of long-term decline of eelgrass. And poor water quality and sediment conditions really may be still unsuitable in many places for eelgrass to grow. And that's frustrating for managers, it's frustrating for conservationists, and it's for scientists as well. But what we can do is start using places where management of nutrients is happening, and such places like West Falmouth Harbor, where we show that there is now improvement of water quality, and there's also a natural eelgrass meadow in the system. So we might have a higher chance for recovery. Seagrass flowering and seed production is also important to show that there is a natural recruitment. But we can also collect those seeds and try to improve methods in the lab to germinate them and to grow them out, make them a little bit more resilient so that we can actually use them for restoration. And with that, I just want to thank you and have time for questions, hopefully.
Thank you. We have time for one question. Is there? Yes.
What was the difference in the conditions in South Bay compared to the outer harbor that caused all that eelgrass? 60 years ago, that was only eelgrass.
Yeah, We don't know for sure if it's just water quality that is the harbor itself. The conditions were pretty bad all the way in both Snug Harbor and South Bay. The sediment is not as bad as like in Snug Harbor, but there could be other factors as well. It could be also related to other like shellfishing and other industries as well. So, but yeah, we're not quite sure why it hasn't come back there just naturally and why it's not re-recruiting.